The strange thing about fame is this. The people who deserve it the least usually chase it the hardest. The cameras flashed so fast they turned the Manhattan sidewalk white. Reporters shouted over each other. Security guards pushed against the growing crowd. Someone dropped a microphone near the hotel entrance, and the sharp crack echoed through the cold November air like a gunshot. Ethan Callaway barely reacted. After 15 years as the CEO of one of America's largest media corporations, chaos had become background noise. Cameras followed him the way shadows followed light. Every mistake, every relationship, every dinner, every breath. It all became content eventually. Mr. Callaway, is the merger official? Ethan, over here. Who's the woman beside you? That question finally made him stop walking. His gray eyes shifted toward the young woman standing near the black SUV. Blonde hair tucked beneath a dark knit beanie. Long cream-colored coat. No makeup anyone could notice under the city lights. One hand wrapped around a paper coffee cup, while the other held the passenger door open for an elderly woman trying to step onto the curb safely. She looked completely out of place beside the frenzy, calm in the middle of noise. Ethan frowned slightly. He recognized her immediately. Claire Bennett, the waitress from Billionaire Café 3 blocks from his office. He had seen her almost every morning for the past 4 months. Always the same routine. Black apron, hair tied back, quiet smile. Never asking customers if they recognized him. Never hovering near celebrity tables. Never pretending not to look while secretly taking photos like everyone else eventually did. But tonight she was standing directly in front of 30 cameras. And the internet had already decided what that meant. That's her, one reporter yelled. The mystery waitress. Another camera flash exploded across Claire's face. She blinked once, but didn't move. Ethan watched carefully now. Too carefully. His instincts sharpened the moment attention entered the room. Fame changed people. He had built an empire understanding exactly how it changed them. At first they acted unaffected. Then came interviews. Social media posts. Exclusive stories. Carefully staged vulnerability. Nobody walked away from visibility once they tasted it. Nobody. A young reporter squeezed through the barricade. Claire, are you dating Ethan Callaway? Claire looked up slowly. Her blue eyes met the reporter's for less than a second. Then she glanced toward the elderly woman beside her instead. Watch your step, she said softly, guiding the woman onto the sidewalk. Her voice barely carried above the noise. Ethan studied her expression. No excitement. No panic. No performance. Strange. Claire, another voice shouted. How does it feel going viral overnight? Someone shoved a phone inches from her face. On the screen, Ethan saw the clip that had already reached nearly 40 million views in less than 24 hours. The footage was shaky and grainy. Claire stepping between Ethan and an aggressive crowd outside Billionaire Café that morning. One hand against Ethan's chest to stop him from walking into traffic, while security scrambled too late behind him. 5 seconds. That was all it took for America to become obsessed with her. Silent waitress saves media billionaire. Who is the mysterious blonde beside Ethan Callaway? America's newest sweetheart. Ethan almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The internet could turn a stranger into mythology before breakfast. And now she was here, standing in the spotlight everyone claimed to hate until it finally arrived. He adjusted the cuff of his charcoal coat slowly. Waiting, watching, expecting the shift. The moment she realized attention had value. Claire, another reporter shouted. Would you ever appear on Ethan's network? Finally, she looked toward the cameras fully. Silence rolled across the sidewalk in strange waves. Even the reporters leaned forward, waiting for the first sentence, the first smile, the beginning of another public obsession. Claire stared at the cameras for 2 long seconds. Then her eyes drifted toward Ethan. Not admiring, not nervous, just tired somehow. Like she had seen all of this before and already knew how it ended. She stepped closer toward him. The crowd immediately erupted louder. Ethan braced internally for the performance he knew was coming. Maybe tears, maybe charm, maybe calculated humility. Instead, Claire reached up quietly and removed the Billionaire Café apron still folded over her arm from work earlier that evening. She placed it carefully on the hood of the SUV. Then she looked at Ethan one final time. Your driver should avoid 47th, she said calmly. There's an accident near Lexington. Traffic's blocked for at least a mile. Ethan blinked. That was it. No interview request. No smile for cameras. No dramatic speech. Claire pulled her beanie lower over her hair, and turned away from the lights completely. Reporters shouted after her instantly. "Claire, wait. One photo. Did Ethan pay you?" But she kept walking. Not faster. Not emotional. Just steady. Quiet boots against wet Manhattan pavement. The cameras followed her for nearly half a block before she disappeared into the blur of steam rising from a subway entrance. Gone. Just like that. Ethan stood frozen beside the SUV while flashes continued exploding around him. Something unfamiliar settled heavily in his chest. Confusion. Because for the first time in years, someone had walked away from the exact thing the rest of the world would destroy itself to keep. By 6:30 the next morning, Manhattan had already turned Claire Bennett into a story she never asked to become. The televisions hanging above the counter inside Billionaire Café played the same clip on repeat, while commuters in tailored coats stood in line holding $8 lattes and talking about her like she was a celebrity who had existed for years. "That is her, right?" a woman whispered near the pastry display. "The waitress from the video? I heard she already signed with a modeling agency." "No, my sister works in media. Supposedly Ethan Calloway is flying her to Los Angeles." Claire kept steaming milk without looking up. The espresso machine hissed loudly beside her. Cups clinked against saucers. Rain tapped softly against the cafe windows facing 48th Street. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. She preferred them over cameras. "Claire." Her manager, Denise, lowered her voice while wiping down the register. "Table 12 keeps asking for you specifically." Claire glanced toward the corner booth. Two young women sat there pretending not to stare at her while secretly recording with their phones beneath the table. She looked away immediately. "Can you switch me to kitchen prep for an hour?" Denise frowned sympathetically. "Again?" Claire nodded once. "Please." Denise studied her for a moment before sighing. "You know most people would kill for this kind of attention." Claire reached for another ceramic mug carefully. "That is the problem." Denise did not answer after that. She simply handed Claire an apron from the back room and let her disappear through the swinging kitchen doors. The noise softened immediately once she entered the prep area. Fewer voices. No television screens. Only the steady rhythm of knives against cutting boards and the smell of fresh rosemary from the soup station. Claire exhaled slowly for what felt like the first time all morning. There she is. Old Mr. Russo looked up from the bakery counter with flour covering both hands. 72 years old. Thick Brooklyn accent. The unofficial grandfather of Billionaire Café. America's favorite mystery woman. Claire groaned quietly. "Please do not start." Mr. Russo chuckled under his breath. "Too late. My granddaughter sent me the video 3 times before sunrise." He studied her face more carefully then. "You okay, kid?" Claire tied the black apron around her waist without answering immediately. Finally, she nodded once. "I just want things to go back to normal. That ship sailed yesterday." Mr. Russo slid a tray of croissants into the oven. "The internet already named you." Claire closed her eyes briefly at that. The silent waitress. She had seen the hashtag accidentally while checking weather updates on her phone before work. 28 million mentions overnight. Thousands of edited clips. Fan accounts. People analyzing her facial expressions like hidden messages. Strangers claiming they understood her personality from 6 seconds of silence. It made her stomach feel tight. She moved toward the prep sink and began washing strawberries mechanically. Water rushed over her fingers while voices from the dining room echoed faintly through the walls. "You know what I do not understand?" Mr. Russo said softly behind her. "What?" "Why you are scared of being seen." Claire's hands stopped moving for half a second. "I am not scared of being seen." "Then what?" She stared down at the bright red strawberries floating beneath the faucet. "I am scared of what people become once cameras arrive." Mr. Russo did not joke after that. Outside the kitchen doorway, another burst of laughter echoed from the cafe floor. Phones. Voices. Curiosity. Claire dried her hands slowly before slipping her own phone from her coat pocket. 12 missed calls. 43 unread messages. 3 interview requests. 1 unknown number from Los Angeles. She deleted them all without opening a single one. Then another notification appeared across the screen. "Ethan Calloway requests private meeting." Claire stared at the message for several seconds. No emotion crossed her face, but her thumb tightened slightly around the phone. "Trouble?" Mr. Russo asked carefully. "No," she locked the screen again. "Just noise." Across Midtown, Ethan Callaway stood inside the glass conference room on the 43rd floor of Callaway Media Group while an entire marketing team argued around him. "This is bigger than we predicted," one executive said excitedly. "People are obsessed with her because she feels authentic." "Exactly," another added. "America is exhausted by influencers. Claire Bennett feels real." Ethan remained silent near the windows overlooking Manhattan. Rain blurred the skyline outside into silver streaks. "We could offer her a special interview," someone continued. "Maybe a streaming deal. Human interest series. The audience engagement would be insane." Ethan finally spoke. "She will say no." The room fell quiet instantly. "Nobody says no forever," the vice president replied confidently. Ethan looked down at the city streets 40 stories below. Thousands of umbrellas moving like dark waves between yellow taxis and steaming sidewalks. Somewhere down there, Claire Bennett was probably serving coffee again, like none of this existed. The thought irritated him more than it should have. He had spent half his life learning exactly how attention worked. People chased it, protected it, worshipped it. But Claire treated visibility like something dangerous. His assistant entered carefully holding a tablet. "Sir." Ethan turned slightly. "What?" "We found more information on Claire Bennett." Ethan extended his hand. The assistant hesitated before passing over the file. "There is not much online after age 22. Ethan frowned faintly. Meaning she disappeared. Silence settled across the conference room. Ethan flipped through the sparse reports slowly. College records. Piano competitions from years earlier. Volunteer work. Then suddenly nothing. No social media history. No interviews. No public photographs for almost 6 years. Like someone had erased themselves deliberately. Ethan stared at Claire's old piano recital photo attached near the bottom of the file. Blonde hair shorter than. Same calm eyes. Same expressionless stillness. "Interesting," he murmured quietly. Outside, thunder rolled softly above Manhattan while rain continued falling against the glass. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Callaway realized he was no longer chasing a story for ratings. He was trying to understand a woman who seemed determined to disappear from the world every time it tried to notice her. Claire Bennett left Bellmere Café at 7:15 that evening with her hood pulled low against the freezing Manhattan rain. The sidewalks shimmered beneath reflections of brake lights and towering digital billboards while cold wind rushed between the buildings hard enough to sting her cheeks. Normally, she walked home with headphones on and her eyes down. Quiet. Invisible. But now every passing phone felt dangerous. Every glance lingered too long. A group of college students near the subway entrance suddenly turned toward her at once. "Oh my God," one girl whispered loudly. "That is her." Claire immediately crossed the street before they could approach. Her boots splashed through shallow rainwater along the curb while taxi horns echoed behind her. She hated how quickly recognition changed people. 24 hours ago, nobody would have looked twice at her. Now strangers watched her like she belonged to them somehow. Halfway down Lexington Avenue, her phone vibrated again inside her coat pocket. Unknown number. She ignored it. 10 seconds later, another call appeared. Different number. Ignored again. Then a text message arrived instead. "I only want 10 minutes. Ethan Callaway." Claire stopped walking beneath the awning of a closed bookstore. Rain hammered softly against the metal above her while steam rose from a subway grate nearby. She stared at the message without expression. Another notification followed immediately. No cameras. No press. Just conversation. Claire looked up toward the glowing skyline. Massive screens stretched across nearby buildings advertising streaming shows, celebrity interviews, luxury brands, political outrage. The entire city felt built around attention. Ethan Callaway sat at the center of all of it like a man who controlled gravity itself. And somehow he still did not understand why she wanted no part of his world. Her phone buzzed again. Claire sighed quietly before typing a single response. 15 minutes. Public place. That was all. Ethan received the text while standing alone inside his office overlooking Midtown. For reasons he could not fully explain, relief moved through him faster than victory. He slipped his phone into his coat pocket immediately. "Cancel my dinner," he told his assistant. "Sir, the investors already arrived." "Reschedule." The assistant hesitated carefully. "This is about the waitress?" Ethan adjusted the sleeve of his dark wool coat. "Her name is Claire." 35 minutes later, Ethan entered a small piano bar tucked between a laundromat and an old bookstore on the Upper West Side. No reporters followed him here. The place was too quiet for cameras. Dim amber lights glowed softly against dark wooden walls while a man in his 60s played slow jazz standards near the back corner beside an upright piano with chipped ivory keys. Claire sat alone near the window. Cream sweater, dark jeans, hair loose tonight instead of tied back. She held a ceramic mug between both hands while staring out at the rain sliding down the glass. Ethan noticed something immediately. Even here, in a crowded city filled with noise, Claire somehow carried silence around her like weather. He approached slowly. "You picked this place on purpose," he said. Claire looked up calmly. "Nobody important comes here." Ethan sat across from her. "You think I am important?" "I think cameras think you are." A waitress arrived quietly to take Ethan's order. "Black coffee. Nothing else." Claire waited until the waitress walked away before speaking again. "You should not have contacted me." Ethan leaned back slightly. "You saved me yesterday. I stopped you from getting hit by a taxi. Still counts." Claire looked down at her tea. "You are not used to people helping you without wanting something back." Ethan almost smiled. "You say that like it is a character flaw. Is it not?" The piano player shifted into a slower melody nearby. Soft notes drifted through the room, while rain continued tapping lightly against the windows. Ethan studied Claire carefully now. Up close, she looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like she had spent years carrying invisible weight without complaint. "You disappeared for 6 years," he said finally. Claire's expression did not change, but something colder entered the air between them instantly. "Did you investigate me?" "I investigate everyone." "That sounds lonely." Ethan blinked once. Strange. Nobody ever answered him that way. Most people grew nervous around his questions. Claire simply observed him like someone reading weather patterns. "Why did you erase yourself?" he asked quietly. Claire looked toward the piano instead of answering immediately. The old musician closed his eyes while playing, completely unaware of the world around him. Peaceful, untouched by performance. "Do you know what the difference is between being seen and being watched?" she asked softly. Ethan frowned slightly. "Explain." Claire traced one finger slowly along the rim of her mug. "Being seen feels human." She glanced toward him briefly. "Being watched feels like ownership." Silence settled over the table. Ethan realized then that Claire never spoke dramatically. No rehearsed speeches. No emotional manipulation. She simply told the truth quietly enough that people had no defense against it. "You think attention destroys people," he said. "I think attention changes what people are willing to do." Ethan looked away toward the rain outside. Somewhere deep in his chest, irritation mixed strangely with curiosity. Claire challenged things he normally controlled effortlessly. Public image, influence, visibility. Entire industries depended on his understanding of human desire. Yet this woman sitting across from him behaved like fame was something radioactive. "Then why save me yesterday?" he asked. Claire answered immediately. "Because somebody needed help." Ethan stared at her for several seconds. No hesitation. No hidden motive. Just honesty so direct it almost felt unfamiliar. Before he could respond, the bartender suddenly muted the television hanging above the liquor shelves. A news anchor appeared across the screen beside Ethan's photograph and Claire's viral image from outside Bellmere Café. Breaking story. America obsessed with mystery waitress. Several customers turned instantly toward their table. Phones emerged. Whispers spread. Claire's shoulders tightened almost invisibly. Ethan noticed immediately. "Claire," someone called excitedly from across the room. "Can we get a picture?" Another phone lifted toward her face. Then another. The room changed in seconds. Not dangerous. Not hostile. Worse. Hungry. Ethan stood automatically, prepared to block them if necessary. But Claire touched his sleeve lightly before he moved. "Do not." Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers trembled once before pulling away. Ethan looked at her carefully. For the first time since meeting her, he saw fear. The phones kept rising around Claire like floodwater. Bright screens. Smiling strangers. Excited whispers cutting through the soft piano music one voice at a time. "It really is her. Ask for a picture. Maybe she will post it." Claire lowered her eyes immediately. Ethan noticed how her breathing changed first. Small. Controlled. Like someone trying not to panic in public. The bartender awkwardly reached for the remote again, but the damage was already done. The television above the shelves continued replaying her image beside Ethan's face while a news ticker crawled across the bottom of the screen. Internet falls in love with the silent waitress. Ethan stood beside the table slowly. Everyone back up for a second, he said calmly. His voice was not loud, but authority moved through the room instantly. People hesitated. A few lowered their phones. Claire remained seated, one hand tightening around the ceramic mug hard enough for her knuckles to pale slightly beneath the warm cafe lights. Ethan looked down at her. We can leave through the back. Claire shook her head once. That will only make it worse. You are shaking. I know. The honesty in her voice hit him strangely hard. No pretending. No performance. Just truth spoken quietly. A young woman approached their table, carefully holding her phone against her chest. I am sorry, she said nervously. I just wanted to say you inspired me. Claire finally looked up. The girl could not have been older than 19. Brown winter coat. Nervous smile. Genuine eyes. How? Claire asked softly. Because you looked calm. The girl swallowed. Everyone online is loud all the time. But you looked, she hesitated. Different. Claire's expression shifted almost invisibly then. Sadness mixed with something gentler. You should never confuse silence with peace, she said quietly. The girl lowered her phone completely after that. Sorry, she whispered before stepping away. Ethan watched the exchange carefully. Interesting. Claire never tried to control attention. Yet somehow people listened harder when she spoke softly. Most public figures spent years learning that skill artificially. She carried it naturally without wanting it. The piano player finished his song near the back corner while rain continued sliding down the windows in silver streaks. Claire slowly stood from the table. I should go. Ethan reached for his wallet automatically. I will have my driver take you home. No, Claire. No drivers. No security. She pulled her coat tighter around herself. I can still walk alone for now. Ethan frowned faintly at the last two words. For now? As though she already understood something he did not. Outside, the rain had weakened into cold mist drifting through the streetlights. Ethan walked beside her anyway once they exited the piano bar. Not close enough to crowd her. Just near enough to keep the growing cluster of phones at a distance whenever someone recognized them. Manhattan moved around them in restless waves. Steam rising from subway grates. Sirens far downtown. Couples hurrying beneath umbrellas. Taxi headlights smearing gold across wet pavement. Claire kept her eyes forward the entire time. You know this will get bigger tomorrow, Ethan said eventually. I know. Then why not control the narrative before somebody else does? Claire almost smiled at that. You really believe everything is a narrative? Ethan shoved his hands into his coat pockets against the cold wind. That is because everything becomes one eventually. Claire stopped walking near a small bookstore with darkened windows. She looked toward the giant digital billboard glowing above Times Square several blocks away. A perfume advertisement shifted into celebrity gossip coverage. Then politics. Then scandal. Endless noise. Endless consumption. Do you know what scares me most about people with cameras? She asked quietly. Ethan waited. Eventually they stopped seeing human beings. The words lingered heavily between them. Ethan studied her face beneath the streetlight glow. Pale skin. Exhausted blue eyes. Hair moving softly in the wind. There was no self-pity in her voice. Only experience. Something happened to you, he said carefully. Claire looked away immediately. Good night, Ethan. She turned toward the subway entrance before he could stop her. But after 3 steps, she paused. Do not investigate my past anymore. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Why? Claire glanced back over her shoulder. Because some things survive by being forgotten. Then she disappeared down the subway stairs before he could answer. Ethan remained standing alone on the sidewalk while cold rain gathered slowly across the shoulders of his charcoal coat. Above him, giant screens continued flashing celebrity headlines across the night sky. Yet somehow the loudest thing in his mind was Claire Bennett's silence. The next morning, Callaway Media Group held its weekly executive briefing on the 39th floor. Usually Ethan dominated those meetings effortlessly. Sharp decisions. Faster instincts. Ruthless focus. But today his attention drifted repeatedly toward the folder sitting unopened beside his coffee. Claire Bennett. His head of digital media kept speaking excitedly near the presentation screen. Public engagement increased another 40% overnight. Female demographics especially. They are calling her authentic, elegant, relatable. Ethan barely listened. Merchandise opportunities are already appearing online, another executive added. Somebody started selling knit hats called the Claire Beanie. A few people laughed. Ethan did not. Enough, he said flatly. Silence filled the conference room immediately. Ethan stared through the glass walls, overlooking Manhattan below. Millions of people. Millions of stories. Yet the entire internet had chosen one quiet waitress to consume this week because she refused to behave the way they expected. Strange. I want all coverage involving Claire Bennett removed from our entertainment division, Ethan said calmly. Several executives blinked in confusion. Sir, no paparazzi contracts. No panel discussions. No ambush interviews. The vice president looked stunned. But the audience numbers are enormous. Ethan turned slowly toward him. I am aware. Then why would we walk away from this? Ethan glanced briefly toward the unopened file beside his coffee. Because not everything belongs to us just because people want to watch it. The room fell completely silent after that. Outside the windows, snow began falling lightly over Manhattan for the first time that winter. Small white flakes drifting quietly above a city that never truly stopped looking at people. Snow covered Manhattan in a thin white layer by Friday morning, softening the sharp edges of the city without quieting any of its noise. Bellmere Café was fuller than usual. Tourists pressed against the windows hoping to glimpse Claire Bennett between coffee orders, while influencers filmed exaggerated reactions beside the pastry counter pretending they had discovered some hidden New York treasure. Claire moved through the chaos silently, black apron tied neatly at her waist, hair pinned back again, calm expression untouched despite the constant attention surrounding her. But Ethan noticed the difference immediately the moment he stepped inside. She no longer looked at customers directly. Not because she was rude, because she was tired. The tiny pauses before approaching tables. The way her shoulders stiffened whenever a phone lifted. The careful distance she kept between herself and strangers now. Attention was exhausting her one interaction at a time. Ethan stood near the entrance unnoticed for several seconds while snow melted slowly across the shoulders of his dark coat. Denise spotted him first and nearly dropped the menus in her hands. Mr. Calloway. Half the cafe turned instantly at the sound of his name. Cameras appeared again almost automatically. Claire closed her eyes briefly behind the espresso machine before looking up. Ethan walked toward the counter slowly. Large black coffee, he said calmly. Claire stared at him for one long second. You could have sent an assistant. You would not have accepted that. Something almost resembling amusement flickered briefly across her face before disappearing. She turned toward the coffee machine without another word. Several customers openly recorded them now. Ethan noticed Claire's fingers tighten slightly each time another phone pointed in her direction. You should leave, she said quietly while pouring the coffee. People are following you now. They are following you. Claire slid the cup across the counter. That is temporary. Ethan reached for the coffee but did not drink it. You believe that? Claire finally met his eyes fully. I need to. The answer stayed with him longer than it should have. Before he could speak again, the cafe television mounted above the shelves suddenly shifted to breaking entertainment news. A smiling anchor appeared beside giant photos of Ethan and Claire walking together outside the piano bar 2 nights earlier. America cannot stop talking about the mysterious waitress connected to media billionaire Ethan Calloway, the anchor announced cheerfully. Sources close to Calloway media suggest major offers are already on the table. Claire froze completely. Not dramatic. Not visible to most people. But Ethan saw it instantly. Her breathing stopped for half a second. Then the room exploded with whispers. There they are. I knew it. Oh my God, this is insane. Denise rushed toward the remote, fumbling nervously to lower the volume. Too late. The damage was already spreading across the cafe like fire through paper. One customer stood suddenly and approached the counter holding out a phone. Claire, are you signing with Ethan's company? Another voice followed immediately. Are you quitting Bellmere? Can we take one picture together? Claire stepped backward instinctively. Ethan watched her carefully. The color had drained slightly from her face now. Not anger. Fear again. Real fear. She removed her apron slowly and placed it on the counter with trembling hands. Denise, she said softly, I need 5 minutes. Denise nodded immediately. Go. Claire disappeared through the kitchen doors before anyone could stop her. Ethan followed without thinking. The noisy cafe faded behind him once the heavy kitchen door swung shut. Stainless steel counters. warm air smelling faintly of cinnamon and coffee beans. Mr. Russo looked up from the bakery station as Claire leaned both hands against the prep sink, trying to steady her breathing. "Kid?" he asked gently. Claire shook her head once without speaking. Ethan stopped several feet away, suddenly aware he had entered a place where cameras did not belong. Something private. Something human. Claire splashed cold water against her wrists while keeping her eyes lowered. "I told you this would happen," she whispered quietly. Ethan moved closer. "Claire, everywhere I go now, people look at me like I stopped being real." Her voice stayed calm somehow despite the tremor beneath it. "They do not care who I am. They care what I represent to them." Ethan had no immediate answer, because deep down, he knew she was right. His entire industry survived on that exact transformation, turning people into symbols. Stories. Consumption. "I can stop the coverage," he said finally. Claire looked up sharply then. "Can you?" The question hit harder than accusation would have. Ethan hesitated, not because he lacked power, but because for the first time in years he was honestly unsure whether the machine he built still listened to him completely. Claire laughed softly at his silence. Not cruelly. Sadly. "That is what scares me about powerful people," she murmured. "Eventually, they stop controlling the thing they created." Snow drifted quietly outside the small kitchen windows while distant voices from the cafe floor continued buzzing around headlines and speculation. Ethan watched Claire carefully now. No makeup, no media training, no performance. Just a tired young woman trying desperately to protect something invisible inside herself from being consumed by strangers. "Come with me tonight," Ethan said suddenly. Claire frowned faintly. "Where?" "There is something I want you to see." "Another interview?" "No cameras." She studied him suspiciously. Ethan understood why. Men like him always wanted something eventually. Attention, access, ownership. But for reasons he still could not fully explain, he no longer wanted Claire Bennett as a story. He wanted to understand why her silence made him feel ashamed of how loudly the world operated around him. "1 hour," he said quietly. "Then I will leave you alone." Claire looked toward the kitchen doorway where muffled voices from the cafe continued chasing her name. Her shoulders lowered slightly with exhaustion. Finally, she nodded once. 1 hour. Ethan exhaled softly. Strange. Winning billion-dollar negotiations usually felt easier than earning trust from one quiet waitress who still looked at him like a man standing too close to a fire he did not understand. At 8:40 that night, Ethan Calloway drove Claire Bennett out of Manhattan for the first time since she had met him. Snow drifted softly across the windshield while the city lights slowly faded behind them mile by mile. Claire sat quietly in the passenger seat of the black Mercedes with both hands folded inside the sleeves of her cream sweater. She had not asked where they were going again. Ethan respected that silence more than he expected to. Most people filled empty space nervously around him. Claire seemed to understand that silence could breathe on its own. The highway stretched ahead beneath pale winter fog, while soft jazz played quietly through the speakers. Ethan glanced toward her briefly. "You can still change your mind." Claire kept watching the dark road ahead. "I almost did twice already." Something about the honesty in her answer made him smile faintly for the first time all day. 40 minutes later, Ethan turned off the highway toward a small coastal town north of the city. The streets were nearly empty beneath the snowfall. Old brick storefronts. Dim Christmas lights hanging from lamp posts. Quiet. Human. Claire frowned slightly as he parked beside a modest white building near the harbor. No cameras. No security teams. No reporters. Just a weathered wooden sign swinging gently above the entrance. Harbor House Youth Center. Claire looked at him carefully. "Why are we here?" Ethan shut off the engine. "Because this place saved my life once." That surprised her enough to show briefly across her face. Ethan stepped out first and held the door open while snowflakes drifted softly through the cold night air around them. Inside, the building smelled faintly of coffee, old books, and fresh paint. Warm yellow lights glowed against wooden floors while distant laughter echoed somewhere deeper inside the center. A woman in her 60s looked up from the front desk immediately and smiled warmly. "Ethan." "Hi, Margaret." Claire watched the interaction carefully. Different version of Ethan here. Softer somehow. Less armored. Margaret noticed Claire beside him and smiled kindly. "So this is the girl the entire internet cannot stop talking about." Claire stiffened instantly. Ethan caught it immediately. "Margaret." "Sorry." The older woman said gently. "Old habits." Claire relaxed slightly after that. Margaret stepped around the desk and hugged Ethan without hesitation. Claire noticed the small details then. The way Ethan hugged her back immediately without awkwardness. The framed photos covering the hallway walls behind them. Teenagers at graduations. Community dinners. Basketball teams. Ethan appearing in some of the older pictures much younger and thinner than she had ever seen him. You grew up here, Claire realized quietly. Ethan nodded once. After my mother died. The answer carried no performance. No carefully crafted vulnerability for sympathy. Just truth. Claire followed him silently down the hallway while snow tapped softly against the windows outside. Several teenagers waved excitedly when they recognized Ethan. One boy nearly dropped a stack of board games in shock. Mr. Calloway? Ethan laughed quietly. Easy there, Tyler. You never told us you were bringing somebody famous. Claire nearly turned around immediately at the word famous, but Ethan spoke before she could retreat inward again. Claire is not famous. Tyler blinked awkwardly. Sorry. Claire looked at Ethan carefully after the teenager disappeared down the hall. You corrected him quickly. Ethan shrugged lightly. Because it matters. The youth center gymnasium glowed softly at the end of the corridor. Around 20 teenagers sat scattered across folding chairs, while volunteers served hot chocolate from large silver containers near the back wall. No cameras anywhere. No phones lifted. Nobody trying to consume anyone else. Just people existing together quietly. Claire visibly relaxed for the first time in days. Ethan noticed immediately. I used to sleep in the office upstairs when I was 16, he said while walking beside her. Margaret caught me stealing sandwiches from the kitchen one winter. Claire looked toward him slowly. You? Ethan smiled faintly. Contrary to popular belief, I was not born wearing a $5,000 coat. Claire almost laughed at that. Almost. Ethan noticed the tiny shift anyway. My mother worked 2 jobs until she got sick, he continued quietly. After she died, this place kept me alive long enough to become somebody else. Claire stopped walking near one of the framed photographs on the wall. A younger Ethan stood beside Margaret holding a scholarship certificate with snow falling around them exactly like tonight. He looked thinner, less certain, human in a way the world no longer saw him. Why are you showing me this? She asked softly. Ethan looked around the gymnasium. Teenagers laughing. Volunteers cleaning up spilled marshmallows. Warm light reflecting against snow-covered windows. Because this place existed before cameras found me, he said quietly. And sometimes I need to remember that version of myself still exists somewhere. Claire stared at the old photograph silently. Then finally she whispered something so softly Ethan barely heard it. That is different. Ethan turned toward her. What is? Claire looked around the youth center again. Most powerful people only show kindness when somebody is watching. The words settled heavily between them. Ethan realized then that Claire expected performance from wealthy people the same way he expected ambition from everyone else. Both of them had spent years surviving inside assumptions about human nature. A little girl suddenly ran through the gym carrying construction paper snowflakes and stopped directly in front of Claire. Do you want one? She asked shyly. Claire blinked in surprise. Me? You look sad. The child held out a paper snowflake carefully cut by uneven little hands. Claire accepted it slowly. Thank you. The girl smiled brightly before running away again. Claire stared down at the paper snowflake for several long seconds. Ethan watched her expression soften in a way he had never seen before. No fear. No guarded distance. Just quiet emotion catching her unexpectedly off balance. Nobody here asked for your picture, Ethan said gently. Claire looked up at him slowly. No, Ethan shoved his hands into his coat pockets while snow continued falling outside the gym windows. Because people only consume strangers when they stop seeing them as human beings. Claire froze completely at the words. Ethan held her gaze steadily. I listened to what you said. For the first time since Ethan Calloway entered her life, Claire Bennett looked at him without suspicion. Claire stayed at Harbor House far longer than she intended to that night. At first, she stood near the back wall, watching quietly, while volunteers cleaned up paper decorations and stacked folding chairs. Then one of the younger girls asked if she knew how to play piano after noticing her stare linger on the old upright instrument near the gym stage. Claire hesitated only briefly before sitting down on the worn wooden bench. Ethan watched from across the room as her fingers touched the keys carefully, almost like greeting something she had not seen in years. Then the music started. Soft. Slow. beautiful enough to quiet the entire gymnasium within seconds. Teenagers stopped talking mid-sentence. Volunteers turned toward the stage. Snow drifted silently outside the windows while Claire played beneath the warm yellow lights with her eyes lowered toward the piano keys the entire time. No performance. No attention-seeking. She played like someone speaking privately to memories instead of an audience. Ethan felt something tighten unexpectedly in his chest. He had attended concerts inside million-dollar theaters, private galas, celebrity charity events. None of them felt like this, because none of them were honest the way Claire's music was honest. When the final note faded, silence lingered across the room for several seconds before the teenagers erupted into applause. Claire startled slightly at the sound, like she had forgotten people were listening. "That was amazing," Tyler said loudly from the front row. Claire immediately stood from the piano bench. "It has been a long time. You should play professionally," one of the volunteers added. Claire shook her head once. "No." Ethan noticed the answer came too quickly. Like refusal had become instinct. Margaret approached the stage slowly with warm eyes. "Your father used to play here too." Claire froze completely. Ethan looked between them in confusion. Margaret's smile faded slightly the moment she realized what she had revealed. "You knew my father?" Claire asked quietly. Margaret nodded once. "Thomas Bennett volunteered here after Hurricane Sandy." Ethan watched the color slowly drain from Claire's face. "How do you know his name?" Margaret hesitated gently. "Because your father saved this building." Silence filled the gymnasium again, heavier this time. Claire stared at Margaret without blinking. Ethan stepped closer instinctively, sensing something shifting beneath the surface. Margaret lowered her voice carefully. "There was flooding during the storm. Basement electrical fire. Your father stayed behind helping evacuate kids after the first responders pulled back." Claire looked away immediately toward the snow outside the windows. Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly again. "I did not know he volunteered here," she whispered. Margaret's expression softened deeply. "He never talked about it?" Claire shook her head once. "He did not talk much about work after." She stopped herself before finishing. Ethan understood anyway. After whatever happened. Margaret touched Claire's arm gently. "Your father was a good man." Claire swallowed hard, but said nothing. The room suddenly felt smaller around Ethan. He had spent weeks trying to understand why Claire feared cameras with such quiet intensity. Now pieces finally began aligning inside his mind. Thomas Bennett. The name sounded familiar somehow. Not from Claire's file. From somewhere older. Somewhere buried beneath years of headlines and breaking news cycles. Ethan frowned slightly. Then realization hit him all at once. A firefighter. National media coverage nearly 7 years ago. Endless televised footage after a collapsed apartment rescue during a winter storm. Ethan remembered because Callaway Media had covered the story nonstop for almost 2 weeks. He remembered helicopters, reporters, commentators debating responsibility while grieving families stood behind barricades trying to breathe. Ethan looked toward Claire slowly. "Oh God." Claire sensed it immediately. "You remember," she said softly without turning around. Ethan did not answer right away because suddenly he did. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to feel shame rise quietly inside his chest. "Claire." "They filmed everything," she whispered. The gymnasium noises faded around them until only her voice remained. "The reporters stood outside our building for days." Her eyes stayed fixed on the falling snow beyond the windows. "People kept asking my mother how she felt while she could barely stand." Ethan could not look away from her now. Claire laughed softly then. Not bitter, just exhausted. "Somebody sold t-shirts with my father's face on them before his funeral even happened." The words landed like stones in Ethan's chest. Around them, the teenagers quietly drifted toward the opposite side of the gym, sensing this conversation no longer belonged to strangers. Claire folded her arms tightly across herself. "I was 17. Her voice remained calm somehow despite everything inside it. "Every time I opened my phone, there were videos analyzing my father's death like entertainment." Ethan lowered his eyes. Because she was right. That was exactly what his industry had done. Turned grief into content. Human pain into ratings. Claire finally looked at him then. Blue eyes shining softly beneath the warm gym lights. "You asked why I disappeared." Ethan could not speak. "I disappeared because cameras took everything they could from my family and still wanted more." Silence stretched painfully between them. Snow continued falling outside, while somewhere down the hallway teenagers laughed faintly over a card game, completely unaware of the earthquake happening quietly inside the gymnasium. Ethan looked toward the old piano where Claire's hands had created something beautiful only minutes earlier, then back toward her tired eyes. "Claire," he said carefully, "I did not know." "I know." Somehow that made it worse. Ethan ran one hand slowly across the back of his neck. For the first time in years, words failed him completely. Apologies suddenly felt too small for systems built on consuming human suffering. Claire looked toward the paper snowflakes still folded carefully inside her coat pocket from earlier that evening. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she asked softly. Ethan shook his head once. Claire's expression drifted somewhere far away. "Eventually people forgot my father was a person." The gymnasium lights hummed quietly above them, while snow pressed softly against the windows like silence trying to enter the room. Ethan stared at Claire Bennett and realized something terrifying then. For years he had believed attention was power. But standing in that small youth center beside a grieving daughter who still carried scars from the world he helped create, attention suddenly looked a lot more like hunger. The drive back to Manhattan felt different after that night at Harbor House. Neither Claire nor Ethan spoke much while snow drifted across the dark highway beneath pale streetlights. But the silence between them no longer felt guarded. It felt understood. Claire rested her forehead lightly against the cold passenger window while blurred lights moved across the glass in soft streaks of gold and white. Ethan kept both hands steady on the wheel, though his mind remained trapped inside the gymnasium beside her father's memory. He had spent years convincing himself that media simply reflected human nature. Give people attention and they would choose what to watch. But now another truth pressed painfully against his chest. Sometimes the world watched because companies like his taught them how. "You are quiet," Claire said softly without looking at him. Ethan almost laughed at the irony. "I think you are contagious." That finally pulled a faint smile from her. Small, tired, real. Ethan glanced toward her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "I keep remembering the coverage after your father died." Claire's smile disappeared gently. "Most people do not." "I do." Snow hissed softly beneath the tires. Ethan swallowed once before continuing. "I remember one reporter asking your mother how she felt while she was crying." Claire closed her eyes slowly. "Yeah." Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I aired that segment on every network we owned." The confession sat heavily inside the car. Claire did not answer immediately. Finally she whispered, "You did not know me then." "No." Ethan stared ahead into the falling snow. "But I knew exactly what sold." Silence returned after that. Honest silence. Not comfortable, but necessary. When they reached Manhattan close to midnight, Claire expected Ethan to stop outside her apartment building like before. Instead, he parked several blocks away beside the East River Promenade where the city lights reflected across black water beneath the snowfall. "What are we doing?" Claire asked quietly. Ethan turned off the engine. "Thinking." Claire looked out toward the frozen riverfront where almost nobody walked this late at night. "That is dangerous for someone like you." Ethan smiled faintly. "I am beginning to notice." They stepped outside into the cold together. Wind rolled off the river hard enough to sting their faces while snowflakes melted slowly against their coats. The city skyline towered behind them, glowing silver and gold beneath the clouds. Beautiful from a distance. Loud up close. Claire walked toward the railing overlooking the water while Ethan followed several feet behind. "Do you ever wish nobody recognized you?" she asked softly. Ethan shoved his hands into his coat pockets against the cold. "Every day." Claire looked genuinely surprised by that. "Really?" Ethan nodded once. "There are entire restaurants I cannot enter anymore without changing the atmosphere the second I walk in." Claire stared out across the dark water thoughtfully. "That sounds lonely." Ethan almost answered automatically with some polished response about success requiring sacrifice. Instead, he told the truth. "It is." The wind carried silence between them again. Then Ethan spoke carefully. "I have been thinking about something you said." Claire glanced toward him. "Which part?" "That people stop seeing human beings once cameras arrive." Claire lowered her eyes slightly. "I was angry." "No." Ethan shook his head once. "You were right." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. Ethan stepped closer to the railing beside her. Snow settled lightly across his dark coat shoulders while Manhattan glowed behind them like another universe entirely. "My company has 6 entertainment divisions," he said quietly. 3 celebrity networks. hundreds of digital reporters, thousands of articles every week. Claire listened silently. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking whether people deserve privacy simply because the audience wanted access. Claire studied him carefully now. Most powerful men defended themselves when confronted with uncomfortable truths. Ethan looked almost ashamed instead. "You built something enormous," she said softly. Ethan laughed quietly without humor. "That does not mean I built it correctly." Before Claire could answer, Ethan's phone buzzed sharply inside his coat pocket. He frowned after seeing the caller ID. "Board chairman. At midnight. Not good." Ethan answered immediately. "What happened?" The voice on the other end spoke rapidly enough that Claire could hear panic even from several feet away. Ethan's expression hardened slowly while listening. "Who approved that?" he asked coldly. Silence. Then another answer. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Pull it immediately." Claire watched tension spread visibly across his face. "What is it?" she asked once the call ended. Ethan stared out at the river for several seconds before answering. "One of our entertainment sites released leaked footage from your father's memorial service tonight." Claire froze completely. Ethan continued quietly, disgust visible in every word now. "Somebody found old family recordings and turned them into a feature article about your past." The world seemed to stop moving around Claire all at once. Snow continued falling softly. Water moved darkly below the bridge lights. Somewhere far behind them a siren echoed through Manhattan. But Claire stood perfectly still beside the railing like somebody had reached inside her chest and reopened something carefully buried years ago. "I told them to remove all coverage involving you," Ethan said quietly. Apparently not everyone listened. Claire looked away immediately toward the river. Ethan stepped closer instinctively. "Claire, do not." Her voice remained calm somehow, which frightened him more than anger would have. "I am handling it." Claire laughed softly then. "Not bitter. Worse. Empty. That is the problem, Ethan." She finally turned toward him again. Snow melted slowly through strands of her blonde hair, while her blue eyes looked more exhausted than he had ever seen them. "People like you always think pain can still be managed once it starts spreading." Ethan had no defense against that, because deep down he knew she was right. The internet never stopped eating once it tasted grief. Claire folded her arms tightly against the freezing wind. "I need to go home." Ethan nodded immediately. "I will walk you upstairs." "No." She stepped backward slightly. "I just need quiet." Ethan watched her carefully. The city lights reflected faintly in her eyes now, but there was no anger inside them. Only disappointment. Not in him alone. In the world itself. Claire turned and walked slowly toward the street without another word. Ethan remained standing beside the river while snow covered the empty promenade around him. And for the first time since becoming one of the most powerful men in American media, Ethan Callaway felt completely powerless against the machine he helped create. By sunrise, the leaked memorial footage had spread across every major platform in the country. Clips of 17-year-old Claire standing beside her mother outside a church. Reporters shouting questions while cameras zoomed close enough to capture tears she clearly tried to hide. Headlines framed grief like entertainment again. The girl who disappeared. The tragedy behind America's silent waitress. Ethan Callaway sat alone in his office watching the numbers climb in real time across giant screens covering the conference wall. 40 million views before breakfast. Advertising revenue increasing by the minute. Executives speaking excitedly through speakerphones about engagement metrics and audience retention. Ethan felt sick. "Pull every article now," he said coldly. Silence followed across the conference line. Finally, someone cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, legally the footage was licensed years ago." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I do not care. Removing it now could create backlash." Ethan stood slowly from his chair. Manhattan stretched beyond the glass walls behind him beneath pale winter sunlight, beautiful and ruthless all at once. "Then let them be angry." Another executive spoke carefully. "Ethan, with respect, this is becoming bigger than one story." Ethan stared at the frozen city below. That is exactly the problem. He ended the meeting before anyone could argue further. 30 minutes later, Ethan walked directly into the entertainment division newsroom for the first time in nearly 2 years. Dozens of employees looked up immediately in surprise. Giant monitors flashed celebrity scandals across every wall, while keyboards clicked rapidly beneath fluorescent lights. The entire room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and exhaustion. Ethan moved through the newsroom silently until he reached the editor responsible for Claire's leaked footage. Young, ambitious, nervous now. Sir, the editor stammered, standing quickly. Ethan placed a printed screenshot from the memorial article onto the desk between them. Claire's face stared back from the paper. 17 years old. Devastated. Surrounded by microphones. Did you watch this before publishing it? Ethan asked quietly. The editor swallowed hard. It tested well with focus groups. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Not from anger. From disappointment, so deep it felt physical. That was not what I asked. Silence. The editor finally looked down. No, Ethan nodded once slowly. That is the last article you will ever publish for this company. Shock spread across the newsroom instantly. Keyboards stopped clicking one by one. Ethan looked around at the glowing screens surrounding them. Endless headlines. Endless outrage. Endless consumption disguised as information. Suddenly it all looked unbearably small. Effective immediately, he said calmly to the entire room. Callaway Media will no longer publish unauthorized personal tragedy content. Someone blinked in confusion. Another reporter laughed nervously like they misunderstood him. Ethan continued anyway. No funeral footage. No grieving family ambushes. No private recordings sold as entertainment. Sir, a senior producer interrupted carefully. That would dismantle half the division. Ethan met his eyes steadily. Then dismantle it. Silence crashed across the newsroom harder than shouting ever could. Ethan loosened his ties slightly, while employees stared at him like a stranger. Maybe he was one now. Across Manhattan, Claire sat alone inside her apartment with the television muted. She had not gone to work, had not answered her phone. Snow rested quietly against the fire escape outside her window, while morning light stretched pale across the floorboards. Her father's old leather jacket lay folded carefully beside the couch. She had taken it from the closet after the footage resurfaced last night. Sometimes grief returned through objects instead of memories. Claire stared at the television screen while reporters discussed her life like a mystery series finale. Then suddenly the coverage changed. Breaking news. Callaway Media shuts down entertainment division. Claire frowned slightly and turned the volume higher for the first time all morning. The anchor looked visibly stunned. In an unprecedented move, Ethan Callaway announced sweeping reforms this morning after leaked footage involving Claire Bennett sparked public criticism online. Another screen appeared beside the anchor showing reporters carrying boxes out of Callaway Media headquarters. Sources inside the company described the decision as emotional and highly personal. Claire sat perfectly still. The phone on her coffee table buzzed softly moments later. Ethan. She stared at the name for several seconds before answering quietly. Hello. Ethan's voice sounded exhausted. I am outside. 20 minutes later, Claire found him sitting alone on the front steps of her apartment building with snow gathering lightly across the shoulders of his black coat. No security. No cameras. No assistants. Just Ethan holding 2 paper coffee cups while watching traffic move slowly through the winter streets. Claire stepped outside carefully. You fired your entire division. Ethan handed her one of the coffees. Only the part that forgot people were human. Claire sat beside him slowly beneath the cold morning sky. Steam rose softly from the coffee between their hands. Why? She asked quietly. Ethan looked down at the city sidewalk below. Because I spent years believing attention was harmless if people volunteered for it. He swallowed once. Your father did not volunteer. Claire lowered her eyes. Ethan continued softly. Neither did you. Traffic moved around them while snow drifted silently across Manhattan rooftops. Somewhere nearby a church bell rang 10 times through the cold air. Claire studied Ethan carefully now. No cameras meant no performance. And for the first time since meeting him, she realized something important. Ethan Callaway looked tired too. Not physically, morally, like a man waking up inside a life he no longer fully recognized. The internet is furious with you, Claire said after a while. Ethan smiled faintly. That might be healthy. Claire looked down at the coffee cup, warming her hands. Then slowly, almost carefully, she spoke words Ethan knew mattered more than any headline ever written about him. My father would have respected that. Ethan stared ahead silently, because suddenly his throat felt too tight for speech. Snow continued falling softly around them, while Manhattan rushed endlessly forward below. But for one quiet moment, neither of them moved. And somewhere high above the city, Giant digital billboards kept flashing louder stories to strangers who would forget them tomorrow. Yet the most important thing Ethan Calloway had done in years happened there instead. On a cold apartment staircase beside a waitress who never wanted fame in the first place. Because sometimes the people who change the world are the same ones who quietly walk away from it when the cameras arrive.